My husband and I arrived to buy a condo from a foreigner. I stayed silent, pretending not to understand a word of German. And then I heard one phrase and froze, unable to believe my ears. Welcome to the Betty Stories channel. Before we begin, please write in the comments where you are tuning in from. We are very interested to know. We wish you a pleasant listening experience with this fascinating story. Keisha closed the bedroom door and pulled a worn textbook from her hiding spot beneath a stack of bed linens. The pages were covered in her neat handwriting, with bookmarks sticking out from various sections. She turned on the desk lamp, dimming the light so it wouldn't be visible from under the door, and opened her exercise notebook. In the living room, the television was booming. Marcus was watching another football game, and she knew he wouldn't disturb her for the next 2 hours. This had been going on for 8 months. Every evening, when her husband worked late or got absorbed in his own activities, Keisha sat down with her textbooks. At first, it was just curiosity. An advertisement for free online foreign language courses had popped up on the internet. Then, it pulled her in. She liked discovering something new, feeling her brain work, sensing how words formed into sentences, and gradually beginning to understand a strange speech. It was like solving a puzzle, only much more exciting. But she told Marcus nothing, and she didn't intend to. 2 years ago, when she got excited about the idea of taking floral design classes, he had laughed at her so hard that her desire faded away on its own. "Keisha, you realize that's not a serious thing, right?" he had said back then, not even looking up from his tablet. "You'll waste money, go for a month, and quit, just like always." "I haven't quit anything just like always," she had tried to object. "I just want to try something new." "New?" he chuckled. "You have a new hobby every month. First yoga, then painting, then some other nonsense. You'd be better off taking care of the house properly." Back then, she had remained silent, but the resentment settled deep inside. And when, 6 months later, she decided to sign up for those yoga classes, he didn't even let her finish speaking. He started up again. "We don't have money for nonsense. Do you even know how much utilities cost these days?" Since then, Keisha stopped sharing her desires with him. Why bother if he wouldn't take them seriously anyway? It was as if she had become invisible in her own home. Marcus decided where they went on vacation, what furniture to buy, and when to have guests over. She cooked, cleaned, agreed, and sometimes tried to object, but he would wave her off. "I know better. You don't understand these things. Let me handle it." And Keisha retreated time after time until she got used to being a shadow in her own life. She poured herself some tea from a thermos she specifically brought into the bedroom so she wouldn't have to go out to the kitchen and attract attention. She settled comfortably on the bed and immersed herself in the exercises. She pronounced words in a whisper, checking her pronunciation through an app on her phone with headphones on. She liked the feeling that she had a secret, something of her own that Marcus didn't know about and didn't control. It was her little space of freedom in a world where everything else had long ceased to belong to her. About an hour later, the shouts of a commentator drifted in from the living room. "Looks like someone scored a touchdown." Keisha raised her head and listened. Marcus was commenting loudly on something, probably talking on the phone with a buddy. She distinguished his excited voice, his laughter. He hadn't laughed like that with her in so long. She sighed and returned to the textbook, trying not to think about how much their life had changed. When they got married 15 years ago, everything was completely different. Marcus was attentive and interested in her opinion. Together they dreamed about the future, walked in the evenings holding hands, made plans, and laughed at trifles. He called her Sunshine and said she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Keisha believed every word. She was happy just to be near him, listening to his dreams about a career, a big house, and the children they would have someday. But over the years, something shifted. Marcus became harder, more self-assured. He started earning good money and seemed to decide that he now had the right to unilaterally rule their life. Keisha worked as an accountant at a small firm. Her salary was modest, barely enough for groceries and her personal expenses. Marcus never missed an opportunity to remind her that it was he who fed the family, paid the mortgage, the car note, and the vacations. "If not for me, where would you be?" he would say when they argued. "In a rented studio with 3 roommates, that's where." Keisha stayed silent because deep down she was afraid he was right, that without him she really wouldn't cope, that she was too weak, too indecisive, too ordinary. They didn't have children. At first they put it off for careers, the mortgage, renovations. Then it just didn't happen. Doctors shrugged their shoulders. Everything seemed fine with both of them. But pregnancy didn't occur. Exams, tests, procedures, it all lasted more than a year and ended in nothing. Over time, this topic became painful, and they stopped talking about it. Secretly, Keisha dreamed of a child, imagining how she would tuck a baby into sleep, read fairy tales, and teach them to walk. But she was afraid to say it aloud, fearing Marcus would say something hurtful again, that it was her fault, that she couldn't even do this one thing. In recent months, a wall had grown between them. He stayed late at work more often, coming home late, tired and irritable. At dinner, he answered in monosyllables, buried in his phone. Keisha tried to start a conversation, asking about his day, telling him something about work, trying to joke. He would nod without listening, and 5 minutes later, he would retreat to the living room and the television. On weekends, he went fishing with friends or disappeared into the garage. Keisha tried to find a way to reach him. She cooked his favorite dishes, his signature smothered pork chops with gravy, mashed potatoes, and cornbread. She suggested going somewhere together, to the movies, to the park, just for a walk. But he refused. "I'm tired, Keisha. Let me rest for God's sake. You don't understand what it's like to grind all week and then have to provide an entertainment program for you, too." And she retreated. She washed dishes, cleaned the apartment, looked out the window at passers-by, and wondered when everything went wrong. At what moment did they become strangers living under one roof? She felt she was losing him, or had already lost him, but she didn't want to give up. She didn't want to admit that 15 years had been lived in vain, that the love was over, that she was left all alone. So, when Marcus suddenly suggested looking for a larger apartment, their 1 bedroom in an old building on the outskirts had long become cramped, Keisha was delighted. Maybe this was a chance? Maybe a joint project, a common goal, would bring them closer, bring back what once was. A new condo, a new setting, a new stage of life. Maybe everything would work out. They started looking through listings. Or rather, Marcus looked, and she sat next to him on the sofa and nodded. He showed options on the tablet, and she timidly expressed her opinion, whether she liked the layout, if the windows were well positioned, if the kitchen was convenient. But he rarely took it into account. "That's too far from the subway," he would wave off. "This one is too expensive, out of our budget. This is in a bad neighborhood. Nothing but trouble there. Do you even understand this stuff?" Over time, Keisha stopped arguing. She just sat silently, looking at the screen, thinking her own thoughts. Weeks of searching turned into a month. They went to viewings on weekends, at first with enthusiasm, then more and more resignedly. And every time something was wrong. The layout was awkward. The neighbors were noisy. The building was too old. The courtyard had no parking, or the price was too high. Marcus was eternally dissatisfied, nitpicking at small details, arguing with realtors. Keisha was tired of this endless running around, of his constant irritation, of the feeling of meaninglessness of it all. Sometimes it seemed to her that he was purposely looking for flaws so as not to buy an apartment, to delay the moment. Why? She didn't understand. And then one evening, as she sat with her textbooks practicing another grammar exercise, Marcus burst into the bedroom. He didn't even knock. He just threw the door open. Keisha flinched and barely managed to slam the notebook shut, shoving it under her pillow. Her heart beat faster. What if he noticed? "Keisha, look." He handed her his phone with a listing, paying no attention to her confusion. "This is the one. A 3-bedroom, 1,200 square feet. Good neighborhood, and the price is acceptable. A foreigner is selling it, some German guy. We're going to see it tomorrow." Keisha caught her breath. It seemed he hadn't noticed anything. She took the phone and scanned the description. The condo really looked good. Bright rooms with high ceilings, a large kitchen, 2 bathrooms, a glass-enclosed balcony. The photos were high quality, professional. It was evident the owner took care of the place. The hardwood floors shone, the walls were freshly painted, the furniture was solid, without wear and tear. "It's beautiful," she said cautiously, examining the photos. "Why is he selling?" "He's going back to his home country. It says right there." Marcus took the phone back, as if she had been looking at it too long. "Lived here for several years for work. Contract ended. He's returning. I already contacted him, agreed on tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Will you go?" "Of course I'll go," Keisha answered. "Well, that's great. I hope this option works out because I'm tired of running around every weekend." He stretched and yawned. "All right, I'm going to finish watching the game. Why are you sitting here?" "Just reading a little before bed." "Uh-huh." He was already turning toward the door. "Just don't stay up too late. We have to get up early tomorrow." He left, closing the door behind him, and Keisha remained sitting on the bed, staring into the void. A German. A foreigner. Something sparked inside her. She pulled the notebook back out from under the pillow, opened the last page where she wrote down new words and expressions. Her knowledge was already quite decent. She could read simple texts, understood speech in movies without subtitles, and even tried writing short notes for practice sometimes. Her online course instructor praised her for her progress, saying she had good pronunciation and a feel for the language. What if? The thought came suddenly and seemed both crazy and tempting to her. What if, at the meeting with the seller, she didn't say she understood the language, just kept quiet, pretended not to know a word? Marcus would surely speak to this German in his native language. Her husband always bragged that after business trips to Europe, he had pulled his conversational level up quite a bit. He had traveled to Berlin and Munich several times for work, communicated with partners, signed contracts. And then she would be able to hear everything they discussed, without filters or translations. Everything that Marcus might not want to tell her. Why did she need this? Keisha herself couldn't fully answer that question. Just something inside told her it was necessary. Some vague anxiety, intuition, a sixth sense, call it what you want. Maybe she wanted to check if Marcus was honest with her. Maybe she was just tired of being on the sidelines of all decisions and wanted to know the truth for once, not filtered through his interpretation. Or maybe she just wanted to use her secret knowledge at least once in her life, to feel that she wasn't as simple and helpless as he thought. She went to bed but couldn't fall asleep for a long time. Marcus snored beside her, sprawled out over 3/4 of the bed. Keisha lay on the very edge, as usual, afraid to move so as not to wake him. When he didn't get enough sleep, he became especially irritable. She stared into the darkness and thought about tomorrow. Strange excitement mixed with anxiety. What would she hear tomorrow, and was she ready for what she might hear? What if it turned out to be something terrible, something after which she could no longer return to her former life? But my former life is already unbearable anyway, she thought. What could be worse than feeling unwanted, invisible, useless every day? In the morning, they left early. The condo was on the other side of the city, in a new, prestigious neighborhood. In the car, Marcus was focused, driving silently, only occasionally throwing out dissatisfied comments about traffic and how no one around knew how to drive. Keisha looked out the window at the passing buildings, playing out possible conversation scenarios in her head. She was scared. What if she didn't understand the speech when she heard it in live conversation? What if she got confused and gave herself away? What if this was all a stupid idea, and she was working herself up for nothing? "Why are you so thoughtful?" Marcus suddenly asked, glancing sideways at her at a traffic light. "Your face is sour. Don't like the apartment already?" "No, I like it," Keisha replied hastily. "I'm just thinking, what if something doesn't work out again?" "Don't stress yourself out. It's a good option. I checked everything, the documents and the history of the condo. It's all clean." He paused, then added, "Don't worry. If anything, I'll translate everything. You understand? With foreigners, you have to be careful. They might try to scam us. These Europeans are tricky. They think we're all suckers here." Keisha remained silent, clasping her hands on her knees. You'll translate? She thought bitterly. The question is just what exactly you will translate and what you will hide. They parked near a modern high-rise building with a glass facade. The lobby was clean, with a concierge behind a counter, a convenient intercom, and surveillance cameras. On every floor in the hall stood leather sofas, and paintings hung on the walls. It smelled of expensive air freshener. Marcus looked around smugly and nodded. Not a bad place. Promising. The price will definitely go up. The whole area is being built up with luxury housing. A profitable investment. Keisha didn't answer. They went up in the elevator to the 12th floor. The elevator was fast, silent, with mirrored walls. Keisha looked at her reflection. Pale face, tense lips, hands nervously clutching her purse strap. She looked frightened. Need to pull yourself together, she thought. Need to act calm, natural. Just keep quiet and listen. Just be yourself, the quiet, invisible saint who never interferes in anything. The elevator doors opened. They walked down a corridor with soft carpeting. Marcus checked the apartment number on his phone and stopped at the right door. Keisha felt her heart pounding wildly. It was starting now. Now she would have to play a role, pretend, be silent. Would she manage? Would she give herself away with an accidental word, a look, a gesture? Marcus rang the doorbell. Footsteps were heard from inside, confident, unhurried. Keisha took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Everything will be fine, she told herself. You'll just listen. Just learn the truth. There's nothing wrong with that. The lock clicked, and the door slowly opened. On the threshold stood a man of about 50, tall, fit, with graying hair and attentive gray eyes. He was dressed in a light shirt and dark trousers, looking neat and welcoming. He smiled and extended a hand to Marcus. Kurt Weber, he introduced himself with a slight accent and immediately switched to his native language, obviously realizing that Marcus understood him. Keisha tensed, but tried not to let it show on her face. She heard every word, the greeting, the invitation to enter, the apologies for the slight mess, although the apartment was perfectly clean. Marcus replied in the same language, briskly and confidently introducing himself, then carelessly nodded in her direction. This is my wife, Keisha. She doesn't speak your language, so I'll translate. Kurt turned to her, smiled pleasantly, and extended his hand. Keisha shook it, smiled briefly in return, and lowered her eyes, portraying shy confusion. Inside, everything tightened with tension. So it had begun. Now she wasn't a witness, just an invisible woman who understood nothing. Please come in. Kurt opened the door wider and stepped aside. They entered a spacious hallway. Keisha looked around, light wood flooring, a built-in closet taking up the entire wall, a mirror in an expensive frame, soft, diffused light from ceiling fixtures. It smelled of cleanliness and the faint aroma of coffee. Kurt led them further into the living room, and Keisha involuntarily gasped to herself. A huge room with panoramic windows offering a view of the park and the river in the distance. The furniture was modern but cozy, a large gray sectional sofa, a coffee table made of glass and wood, bookshelves along one of the walls filled with books and souvenirs. Beautiful, she couldn't resist saying in English. Marcus carelessly translated to Kurt, adding something of his own. Keisha listened closely and caught what her husband said. The wife is impressed, but we'll still see if it's worth the money. Kurt laughed, nodded in agreement, and began showing the apartment. They slowly walked through the rooms, the bedroom with a large bed and its own walk-in closet, the second smaller bedroom, which Kurt used as an office, the studio kitchen with modern appliances and marble countertops. Kurt explained things about the apartment, the building, the neighborhood. Marcus translated in snatches, but Keisha noticed he was omitting details or changing the emphasis. When Kurt mentioned that the building had excellent management that resolved any issues quickly, Marcus translated it as, the management company is so-so, but tolerable. When the owner said the neighbors were quiet, educated people, professors, doctors, business owners, Marcus grunted to Keisha, neighbors are regular folks, haven't had any problems. Keisha stayed silent, pretending to examine the finish, the furniture, the views from the windows. But bewilderment grew inside her. Why was Marcus distorting Kurt's words? Why downplay the merits of the apartment? She didn't understand. Maybe he just wanted to drive the price down, show he wasn't too interested. They returned to the living room. Kurt offered coffee, and Marcus accepted. Keisha sat on the edge of the sofa, folding her hands in her lap, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. Kurt went to the kitchen, and she heard the noise of the coffee machine, the clinking of cups. Marcus paced the room, examining books on the shelves, framed photos on the walls. "Well, do you like it?" he asked Keisha in English without turning around. "Very much," she answered honestly. "The apartment is wonderful." "Yeah, not bad." He scratched his chin. "Although the price is inflated. We'll have to haggle." Keisha wanted to say something, but remained silent. Kurt returned with a tray holding 3 cups of coffee and a plate of cookies. He placed it on the coffee table and sat in the armchair opposite them. Keisha took a cup, thanking him with a nod. The coffee was strong, aromatic, real, not instant. Kurt spoke again, this time in a more serious tone. Keisha listened attentively. He explained that he had lived in this apartment for 3 years. He loved this place very much, but his contract with a local company had ended, and he needed to return home to his family. His wife and adult children had stayed there and missed him. He spoke warmly, with slight sadness, saying it was a pity to part with the apartment. But there was no choice. Marcus listened, nodded, then briefly translated for Keisha. "Says he's leaving for work. Contract ended." Keisha frowned internally. Why didn't he tell her about the family, about the fact that Kurt was sad to leave? These details made the owner more human, more understandable, but Marcus apparently didn't consider it necessary to convey them. Then the conversation turned to the details of the deal. Kurt named a price. It was high, but fair for such a condo in such a neighborhood. Marcus frowned and shook his head. "Too expensive," he said to Keisha in English, then switched back and started bargaining with Kurt. Keisha watched their conversation. Marcus spoke assertively, citing arguments. The real estate market is unstable. Prices are dropping. They have other cheaper options. Kurt objected softly but firmly. The apartment was in excellent condition. The area was prestigious. All documents were clean. They could move in immediately after closing. Marcus didn't back down, offering a price 20% lower. Kurt shook his head, saying that was too big a discount. He couldn't agree. Keisha sat clutching the cup in her hands, feeling superfluous, as if she wasn't there at all, as if this wasn't her apartment, not her future home, not her life. Just a decoration, a silent extra in a play where all the roles were already cast. The bargaining continued for about 20 minutes. Finally, they settled on a compromise price slightly lower than the initial one, but not so much that Kurt would be at a loss. The men shook hands, satisfied. Marcus broke into a smile. "Agreed," he told Keisha. "Got a good discount. See how you have to talk to them? They soften up immediately when they feel you're not a sucker." Keisha smiled weakly in response. Kurt said something, and she perked up, listening closely. He proposed discussing the details. When to conduct the closing, what documents were needed, how best to draft the contract. Marcus nodded, agreeing that yes, everything needed to be discussed in detail. "You understand," began Kurt, addressing Marcus, and Keisha froze. "Deals like this are better structured simply. Less paperwork, less tax implication in my country. I can help with the documents. I have a notary contact. He'll do everything quickly and cleanly." Marcus leaned forward with interest. "What do you propose?" "Well, for example," Kurt spoke calmly, as if discussing the weather, "you can put everything in one owner's name. It's simpler with the bank, with the filings. You can sort it out within the family later if you need to add the wife. I did it that way with my real estate here. First, everything in my name, then I quietly distributed the shares later. Convenient and beneficial." Keisha felt everything go cold inside. She gripped the cup so hard her knuckles turned white. Put it in one owner's name. In Marcus's name, without her. Marcus was silent, as if considering the suggestion. Then he slowly nodded. Sounds reasonable. Indeed, why complicate things? I'll think about it. Of course, it's up to you to decide. Kurt spread his hands. I'm just sharing experience. You have time to think. I can send the notary's contact info. He'll explain in more detail if you're interested. Yes, send it, please. Keisha sat motionless, trying not to betray her emotions. A storm raged inside. Marcus hadn't said a word to her about this conversation. Didn't translate. Pretended nothing important had happened. Just continued chatting nicely with Kurt about renovations, furniture, what would stay in the apartment, and what Kurt would take with him. She looked at her husband, at his confident face, at how he casually leaned back on the sofa, gesturing as he told Kurt something. He looked pleased, relaxed, while she sat next to him feeling the ground disappearing from under her feet. Did he really plan to put the apartment only in his name? Did he really intend to hide this from her? To say that it had to be this way, that it was simpler, that they would add her to the title later, and then just forget? Or not forget, but purposefully not add her so she would be left with nothing, completely dependent on him? Thoughts swirled in her head, one scarier than the next. Maybe she was exaggerating? Maybe he really intended to do the paperwork properly later, just decided to simplify the procedure now. But then why didn't he tell her? Why didn't he discuss it? Why hide this conversation? She bit her lip, trying not to cry. Not here, not now. She had to hold it together. She had to sit through to the end of this meeting, and then she didn't know what would happen then. The conversation continued for another 40 minutes. They discussed the schedule for the independent appraiser, document verification, move-out dates. Kurt was professional and benevolent. Marcus was assertive and businesslike. Keisha sat silently, mechanically finishing her cold coffee, feeling an icy void growing inside her with every minute. Then the men moved on to discussing the terms of the preliminary agreement. Kurt took out a laptop, opened a document, and began showing Marcus a standard form. They bent over the screen, discussing something. Marcus asked questions. Kurt answered. Keisha watched them from the side. Two men deciding important issues, and she was just part of the interior, a voiceless shadow. At some point, Kurt looked up and looked at her. Attentively, scrutinizingly. Keisha lowered her gaze but felt he continued to watch. Then he turned to Marcus and uttered a phrase that made Keisha's breath catch. She doesn't know that the documents will be drafted only in your name, does she? He asked quietly but distinctly. Do I understand correctly? Time seemed to stop. Keisha sat without breathing, without moving, staring into the emptiness before her. Inside, everything snapped. Marcus wasn't embarrassed, didn't even flinch, just chuckled and shook his head. What difference does it make? He said in the same language, casually waving his hand. She doesn't understand anyway. And honestly, it's none of her business. I earn the money, I pay, and I decide. She just lives and enjoys what I provide. So it's all good. Don't worry. Kurt nodded, but something like doubt or disapproval flickered across his face. However, he remained silent and returned to the laptop screen. Keisha continued to sit motionless, but inside, everything was boiling. Shock, pain, rage, despair, everything mixed into one lump stuck somewhere in her throat, making it hard to breathe. She doesn't understand. None of her business, just lives and enjoys. That's how he sees her. That's how he relates to her. Not as a wife, not as a partner, not as a human being. Like a pet that needs to be fed and walked, but has no right to a voice. 15 years of marriage, 15 years she cooked his food, did laundry, cleaned, supported, tolerated his moods, his neglect, his condescension. 15 years she hoped he would change, that everything would work out, that they would be close again. And he didn't even consider it necessary to inform her that the condo, their shared condo, would be titled only to him. She gritted her teeth so hard her jaw ached, but she didn't show a sign. She continued to sit quietly, submissively, unnoticed, as he was used to, as he expected from her. The meeting was coming to an end. Marcus and Kurt exchanged numbers, agreed to call in a couple of days to coordinate the date of the next meeting with the notary. Kurt was polite and courteous, walked them to the door, shook Marcus's hand again, and nodded to Keisha with a smile. They went down in the elevator in silence. Marcus hummed something under his breath, clearly pleased. They walked out onto the street. The sun was shining brightly. It was warm and spring fresh. People were walking along the paths. Children were playing on a playground nearby. An ordinary day, ordinary life. Keisha walked beside her husband, feeling as if she had fallen into some parallel reality. Everything around looked normal, but a hurricane was raging inside her. They got into the car. Marcus started the engine, turned on some upbeat pop music. "Well, Keisha, nice place, right?" he asked, steering out of the parking lot. "I told you we'd find a decent option. This German turned out to be reasonable, not like those cheapskates we saw before. Dropped the price without a problem. I did good, didn't I?" Keisha looked out the window. Inside she was seething, but her voice, when she spoke, sounded calm, almost indifferent. "Yes, nice apartment. See?" Marcus tapped his fingers on the steering wheel in time with the music. "In a week we'll sign the prelim, put down the deposit, and it's in the bag. In a month and a half or two we'll move in. You can start planning renovations if you want to change anything, although everything looks excellent there anyway, I think." "Uh-huh," was all Keisha could squeeze out. Marcus didn't notice anything, continued chattering about the condo, about how luckily everything was working out, how glad he was that this issue would finally be resolved. Keisha listened with half an ear. She was still replaying in her head those phrases she heard in Kurt's apartment. "Documents will be drafted only in your name." She doesn't understand. None of her business. Every word cut like a knife. She had lived in an illusion for so many years that they were a family, that they were together, that he cared about her, and he just kept her around like a convenient housekeeper who didn't object, didn't demand, didn't interfere. Nausea rose to her throat. She closed her eyes, trying to pull herself together. Can't cry now. Can't show weakness. Need to think. Need to decide what to do next. They arrived home. Marcus immediately flopped onto the sofa and turned on the TV. Keisha went to the kitchen, poured herself some water, and drank it in one gulp. Her hands were trembling. She put the glass in the sink and leaned against the countertop, looking out the window at the gray courtyards of their neighborhood. What now? What can she do? If she just asks him directly why he wants to put the apartment in his name, he will surely find a beautiful explanation. He'll say it's simpler for taxes, that he'll retitle everything later, that she doesn't understand these matters, and not to worry. And she would probably believe it, because she wants to believe, because it's scary to admit that the person she lived half her life with is not actually who he pretends to be. But now she knows the truth. She heard his words, his tone, his attitude. She doesn't understand. He didn't even try to hide the contempt because he was sure she wouldn't hear, wouldn't understand, wouldn't find out. Keisha straightened up. No, enough. Enough being convenient, quiet, submissive. Enough closing eyes to the truth and hoping everything will somehow work itself out. She went back into the living room. Marcus was watching some talk show, laughing at the host's jokes. Keisha stopped in the doorway, looking at him. This person intended to deceive her, to deprive her of a roof over her head, to leave her with nothing, and he thought she wouldn't even find out about it. "Marcus?" she called out. "Mm-hmm." He didn't look away from the screen. "I need to talk to you." "Later, Keisha. Can't you see I'm busy?" Before, she would have retreated, walked away, stayed silent, postponed the conversation. But not now. Not today. No, now. He turned his head, looking at her in surprise. There was such firmness in her voice that he had probably never heard from her before. "Why are you getting worked up?" He frowned. "Did something happen?" "Something happened." Keisha took a step into the room. "Tell me, whose name are you planning to put the deed in?" He blinked, clearly not expecting such a question. "In both of ours, naturally. Why?" He lied to her face. What a lie. What are you even talking about? Keisha looked him straight in the eye. Her heart was pounding so hard it seemed about to burst out of her chest. It was terrifying to confront him, not to back down, to demand the truth. But she had already crossed the line. There was no way back. Kurt suggested you put everything in one owner's name, in your name, and you agreed. Marcus's face twitched, his eyes narrowed. How do you... He stumbled. Were you eavesdropping? I heard your conversation. But you don't understand. He cut himself off, and Keisha saw it begin to dawn on him. Don't understand? She chuckled bitterly. Are you so sure about that? Silence hung in the air. Marcus looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then he slowly stood up from the sofa. You know the language? Disbelief mixed with confusion sounded in his voice. Keisha didn't answer, just stood and looked at him, waited for what he would say next. Marcus ran a hand over his face as if trying to come to his senses. Then he sharply stepped toward her. How long? He asked harshly. How long have you known the language? What difference does it make? Keisha stepped back instinctively. What matters is something else. You intended to deceive me. What deception? He raised his voice, and she flinched, but stood her ground. I wanted to simplify the procedure. Then I would have added you to the title. Everything would have been fine. Then, she repeated quietly, or maybe you wouldn't have added me. Maybe you would have left everything in your name. Convenient, right? I completely depend on you. Can't go anywhere. What are you even talking about? Marcus threw up his hands. I slaved away for you for 15 years, provided for you, and now you accuse me of some schemes. Slaved away for me. Keisha's voice trembled, but she continued to stand her ground. And what did I do all these years? Lying on the sofa? I worked, managed the house, tolerated your neglect. What neglect? He interrupted her, advancing. I always treated you normally, provided, cared. Keisha felt something inside break finally. You didn't even consider it necessary to ask my opinion about the apartment. Just decided everything yourself, as always. And I was supposed to shut up and be happy. Yes, because I understand these matters better, he barked. You understand nothing about real estate. And you understand nothing about how to treat a wife, she blurted out, surprised by her own courage. Marcus froze. His face turned red. Veins bulged at his temples. Keisha saw he was barely restraining himself from losing it completely. She had never seen him so confused, angry, and simultaneously somehow frightened, as if the ground was slipping from under his feet just as it had for her. All right, listen. He spoke slowly, syllable by syllable, as if explaining something to a slow child. You eavesdropped on a conversation, understood everything wrong, and now you're throwing a tantrum. I'm explaining to you for the last time. I wanted to simplify the paperwork. It's standard practice. Then we would have calmly added you, but since you don't trust me. I don't trust you, Keisha interrupted him, because I heard what you told Kurt. She doesn't understand anyway. None of her business. She just lives and enjoys what I provide. Silence hung so thick one could hear music playing next door. Marcus stood with his mouth open, and for the first time in all their years together, Keisha saw him at a loss for words. I didn't mean that, he mumbled finally. What did you mean then? Keisha stepped toward him, and now he retreated. Explain to me what you meant when you spoke of me with contempt, when you discussed me with a stranger like something that understands nothing and shouldn't understand. Keisha, I got heated. He tried to soften his tone. Well, slipped off the tongue, it happens. You know I didn't want to offend you. Didn't want to? She felt tears welling up but held them back. She would cry later when she was alone. Now she had to hold on. Marcus, you've offended me for years. Every day, with every word, every look, every decision you made for me. I endured. hoped things would change, thought it was temporary, that you were just tired at work, that you were stressed. But now I realize you simply don't respect me, never respected me. That's not true. He raised his voice again. I respect you. Then why didn't you consider it necessary to tell me the apartment would be in your name? She spoke louder and louder, feeling something hot and unstoppable rising inside. Why hide it? Why discuss it with a stranger, but not with me? Marcus paced around the room like a trapped animal. Then he stopped abruptly, stared at her. And where did you get the idea to learn the language anyway? He asked, and something prickly appeared in his voice. Why were you silent about it? Why hide it? Maybe you have your own secrets, huh? Keisha started in surprise. She didn't expect him to turn everything upside down. I didn't hide it, she said quieter. I just didn't say anything because I knew you would laugh. Like you laughed at floral design, at yoga, at everything that was interesting to me. Don't exaggerate, he waved his hand. I just spoke the truth. You constantly start something and quit. I quit because you killed any desire in me, shouted Keisha, and was frightened by the strength of her own voice. She never shouted, never. Every time I tried to start something, you said it was stupid, unserious, useless. You convinced me that I wasn't capable of anything, and I believed it, believed that I was truly that weak, senseless, worthless. I didn't say that, Marcus objected, but his voice sounded less confident. Maybe not in those words, but the meaning was exactly that. Keisha hugged herself as if she were cold. You know what's scariest? I started believing I deserved this treatment, that I should be grateful you were with me at all, that without you, I was nobody. Marcus was silent, looking at the floor. Keisha waited for him to say something, refute it, prove she was wrong, but he was silent. Say something at least, she asked wearily. He raised his head, and she saw something new in his eyes, not anger, not irritation, but some confusion, mixed with annoyance. What do you want to hear? He asked dully. That I'm a bad husband? That I hurt you? Fine, maybe I did, but I tried. I worked like a dog to provide for us, so you had everything. Apartment, clothes, vacations. And now you say I don't respect you? Money is disrespect? Keisha shook her head. Respect is when your opinion is asked, when your desires are considered, when you aren't discussed behind your back with contempt. How long are we going to go on about this? He exploded again. I explained already. It slipped out. Kurt asked himself. I answered without thinking. Without thinking. Keisha smiled bitterly. When a person speaks without thinking, they speak the truth. What they actually think. And you showed what you actually think of me. Marcus clenched his fists, and for a moment, Keisha was scared. What if he hits her? But he only turned around and walked to the window, staring out at the street. You're exaggerating, he said without turning around. Making a mountain out of a molehill. I'm a good husband. I support the family, don't drink, don't run around. Many in your place would be happy. Many in my place would have left long ago, Keisha replied quietly. He turned sharply. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. What did you say? I said many in my place would have left long ago. She spoke slowly, clearly, and with every word felt herself becoming stronger. Because living with a person who doesn't respect you, who considers you a burden, is unbearable. Are you threatening me with divorce? Marcus stepped toward her, his face twisted. Seriously? Over one phrase you eavesdropped on? Not over one phrase. Keisha shook her head. Over 15 years during which I was invisible in my own home. Over the fact that you intended to deprive me of a roof over my head. Over the fact that even now you don't understand what you did wrong. I didn't deprive you of anything, he yelled. I wanted to simplify the paperwork. You wanted to deceive me, Keisha shouted back, and her voice broke. Because you thought I was stupid, that I wouldn't find out, that I wouldn't understand anything. Because you're used to me being silent and agreeing with everything. They stood opposite each other, both breathing heavily, both at their limit. Outside the window, someone honked. Children shouted in the courtyard. Life went on, but theirs was collapsing. "I don't understand what's happening," Marcus muttered finally. And for the first time in this whole conversation, confusion, almost helplessness, sounded in his voice. "We lived normally. Everything was fine. Where did all this come from?" "Everything was fine for you," Keisha said quietly. "For me? No, not for a long time. I just kept silent, endured, hoped. Hoped for what? That you would notice me." She felt the tears breaking through anyway and didn't hold them back. "That you would remember who I was when we met, that you would love me again. But you fell out of love long ago. I just didn't want to admit it." Marcus stood silently, and his face slowly changed. Anger left, leaving behind something else, fatigue, guilt, or just emptiness. "Maybe so," he said finally, and these words sounded like a verdict. "Maybe you're right? I don't know. I'm tired, Keisha. Tired of work, of problems, of everything. And you? You were always somewhere in the background, convenient, familiar. I didn't think you were unhappy. Thought everything suited you." "Nothing suited me," she whispered. "But you didn't ask." He nodded, walked back to the sofa, sat down heavily, covered his face with his hands. Keisha stood in the middle of the room and didn't know what to do next. There was no strength left to scream, nor to cry. Inside remained only a wrung-out emptiness and some strange clarity. "What now?" asked Marcus without lifting his head. "I don't know," Keisha answered honestly. "But we won't be buying the apartment. At least, not from Kurt, and not the way you wanted." He raised his head, looked at her. "So the deal is off?" "Yes." She said it firmly, without hesitation. "I won't agree to the purchase if it's titled only to you, and anyway, I need time to think about us, about whether there's any point in continuing." "You want a divorce?" he stated without a question. "I don't know what I want." Keisha walked to the window, looked at the yard, at the playground, at the bench where elderly ladies were sitting. "I only know that I can't go on like this anymore. I don't want to." "And what will you do?" Mockery appeared in his voice. "Leave, rent a room on your salary, live alone in some hole on the outskirts." She turned to him, saw him trying to regain control, to return to the old tactic, intimidate, show that without him she would perish. Before, this worked, but not now. "Maybe so," she said calmly. "But it will be my hole, my life, my choice." Marcus opened his mouth to object, but cut himself off. Then he waved his hand, got up from the sofa. "Do what you want," he threw out. "I'm going to Jamal's, crash at his place, think things over too. And you think about your decisions here, maybe you'll come to your senses." He went into the bedroom. Keisha heard him pulling out a bag, throwing things into it. Then he walked out without even looking in her direction and slammed the door. Silence. Keisha stood by the window and watched him walk out of the building entrance, get into the car, drive away. And only when the car disappeared around the corner did she allow herself to slide down to the floor and burst into tears. She cried for a long time, from pain, from relief, from fear of the future, from the bitterness of broken hopes. Tears flowed, and it seemed there would be no end to them. Then, gradually, the sobbing subsided, her breathing evened out. Keisha wiped her face with her sleeve, got up from the floor, went into the bedroom. It was messy there. Marcus had pulled things out of the closet in a hurry without closing the doors. Keisha mechanically tidied up, folded the fallen linen back, then took her notebook and textbook from the hiding place. She sat on the bed, opened to the last page. Tomorrow she would call Kurt, explain the situation, say they changed their minds about buying the apartment, apologize for the wasted time, and then she didn't know. But for the first time in many years, she felt that her life belonged to her again. She took a pen and wrote several sentences on a new page in the language she studied secretly. The words came together easily, naturally. I am stronger than I thought. I will handle this. I will succeed. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in pink and orange tones. Keisha watched this sunset and thought that tomorrow would be a new day, the first day of her new life. In the morning, Keisha woke up early, although she slept poorly, tossing and turning all night, replaying yesterday's conversation in her head. Marcus didn't return, didn't even text. She got up, washed her face with cold water, looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was drawn, shadows under her eyes. But the gaze was somehow different, firmer, more decisive. She brewed coffee, sat in the kitchen with the phone in her hands. She needed to call Kurt, explain that the deal wouldn't happen. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number. Rings. 1, 2, 3. Yes, listening, answered a familiar voice with an accent. Keisha took a deep breath and spoke in his language, slowly trying to pick the right words. Kurt, this is Keisha. We looked at your apartment yesterday with my husband. A pause hung in the air. Then he answered, and genuine surprise sounded in his voice. Keisha, you speak German? Yes. She felt the tension let go a little. I'm sorry I didn't say so yesterday. Circumstances just turned out that way. I understand. He paused. So, you heard our conversation with your husband. Every word. Another pause, longer this time. I'm very sorry, he said finally, and his voice sounded sincere. I shouldn't have agreed to such a scheme. It's just your husband was so persistent, and I thought, well, it's your family business, but I felt awkward, very awkward. You aren't to blame. Keisha looked out the window at the gray morning sky. I'm calling to say that we won't be buying the apartment. Sorry for the wasted time. Wait, said Kurt quickly. But you yourself, do you want to buy it yourself? Keisha was confused. What do you mean? Well, you liked the apartment I saw, and it really is good. Maybe you want to buy it without the husband? I don't have that kind of money, she admitted. I work as an accountant. The salary is small. I can't save up for such an apartment. And a mortgage, a loan? I don't know. Keisha rubbed the bridge of her nose. I never handled this. Marcus always decided everything. Listen, Kurt spoke softer, sympathetically. I understand that things are hard for you right now, but if you really need an apartment, let's try to find a way out. I can lower the price a little, and I can wait while you arrange a mortgage. I have time. I'm not rushing to sell so badly. Keisha felt something warm, like hope, being born inside. Why do you want to help me? Because yesterday, when I looked at you, I saw my daughter. He sighed. She was also in a similar situation a few years ago. Her husband also decided everything for her, kept her in the dark too. She left him, started a new life. She is happy now. And I thought that maybe I can help you at least a little bit too. Tears rose to her throat again, but Keisha held back. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you very much. I'll think about it. I need time to figure everything out. Of course. Call when you're ready. And if you need help with documents or advice, ask. I know a good lawyer who specializes in such cases. They said goodbye. Keisha put the phone on the table and covered her face with her hands. Buy the apartment herself? Alone? Without Marcus? It seemed unreal, frightening, and simultaneously tempting. Her own housing, her own home, her own life. The following days passed in a fog. Marcus returned 3 days later, gloomy and silent. They almost didn't talk. He came home late, left early, slept on the sofa. Keisha avoided conversations too. She needed time to think, to weigh everything, to make a decision. She started studying information about mortgages, divorce, division of property. Read forums, consulted online with lawyers, calculated her finances. The picture emerging wasn't the rosiest, but not hopeless either. In a divorce, she could claim half of their current condo. Selling her share to Marcus, or on the open market, she would get enough for a down payment. And with her stable salary and work history, the bank would likely approve a mortgage for the remaining amount. A week later, she called Kurt again. "I want to try to buy the apartment," she said without preamble, "but I will need your help and patience." "I have enough of both," he answered with a warm smile in his voice. "Let's meet, discuss everything." They met at a cafe not far from Kurt's building. He came with a folder of documents and a lawyer's phone number. Over a cup of coffee, they discussed all the details: price, deadlines, procedure. Kurt really lowered the price by 10%, explaining that he wanted to help and that it was more important for him to sell the apartment to a good person than to get maximum profit. "But first you need to deal with your personal situation," he said cautiously, "with the husband. I don't want to intrude on your family life, but you understand that while you are married, any major transactions will require his consent." "I know." Keisha squeezed the cup in her hands. "I'm filing for divorce this week." Saying it aloud was scary, but simultaneously somehow liberating, as if she finally spoke aloud what had been maturing inside for a long time. That same day, she booked a consultation with the lawyer recommended by Kurt. A woman of about 40, with intelligent eyes and a calm voice, listened to her story and clearly laid out a plan of action. "File for divorce," she said. "Simultaneously demand division of property. You have a joint condo, which means you have a right to half. The husband might try to contest, prove he contributed more, but in the absence of a prenup, the court will most likely divide it equally." "And how long will it take?" 3 or 4 months, if without complications. Could be longer if he resists. Keisha nodded, writing everything down in a notebook. "And one more question." The lawyer looked at her intently. "Are you sure? Sure you want a divorce? Because it won't be simple. Emotionally, financially, morally. Are you ready?" Keisha raised her eyes, met the lawyer's gaze. "Ready," she said firmly. "More than." She postponed the conversation with Marcus until evening, came home, cooked dinner as usual, out of habit. He showed up around 7:30, sat at the table, silently. They ate in silence, and Keisha felt everything inside contracting from tension. Finally, she put down her fork. "Marcus, we need to talk." He raised his eyes, and in them she saw fatigue and some kind of resignation, as if he already knew what she would say. "I'm filing for divorce," she uttered, and her voice didn't tremble. "Tomorrow, I'm going to a lawyer with the documents. I want you to know." He slowly lowered his fork, leaned back on the chair. "So, you decided after all?" He didn't ask. He stated a fact. "Yes." "And there's nothing that will make you change your mind?" "No." He nodded, rubbed his face with his palms. "All right. Maybe you're right. Maybe we really aren't on the same path. I thought about it all week. We've been strangers for a long time, Keisha. I just didn't want to admit it." "I didn't want to either," she said quietly. "But now we can't pretend everything is normal anymore." "Are we going to split the condo?" "Yes, I want to get my half." "Fine." He shrugged. "Just let's not sell. Okay, I'll buy out your share. We'll get an independent appraisal. I'll pay market value." Keisha nodded. It was a reasonable offer, and she was even grateful he didn't start a scandal. "Agreed." They sat a little longer in silence. Then Marcus got up, went to the bedroom to pack things. Keisha remained in the kitchen, listening to him walking through the rooms, opening closets, putting something into bags. Half an hour later, he came out with 2 large bags. "I'll stay at Jamal's for now," he said, stopping in the doorway. "Then I'll rent something. Call if you need anything for the paperwork." "Okay." He stood for another moment, as if wanting to add something but didn't find words. Then he nodded and left. The door closed quietly, without a slam. Keisha remained alone in the apartment, in silence that was now not oppressive, but somehow peaceful. The divorce process turned out to be long and exhausting. Papers, courts, appraisals, negotiations. Marcus, to his credit, didn't put up obstacles and agreed to all terms. 4 months later, they officially dissolved the marriage and divided the property. Keisha received money for her share of the condo, a sum that seemed huge to her and simultaneously was only half of what they had saved over years of marriage. During these months, she managed to do a lot. Got a new job, found a vacancy in an international company where knowledge of foreign languages was required. The salary was 1.5 times higher than before. At the interview, when asked to demonstrate language skills, she spoke confidently and fluently and saw the interviewer's surprise. "Where did you study?" asked the HR manager. "Independently," answered Keisha with a smile. "In the evenings. 8 months. Impressive?" The woman nodded approvingly. "We value such determined employees." The work turned out to be interesting and dynamic. Keisha handled financial accounting for the company's European branches, communicated with foreign colleagues, went to online conferences. For the first time in many years, she felt she was doing something important, that she was valued and respected. Simultaneously, she processed the mortgage. The bank approved the application quite quickly. Stable job, declared income, good credit history. Kurt waited patiently, periodically calling to ask, "How are things? Need help?" "You are very kind," Keisha told him once. "Not everyone would agree to wait so long." "I told you I'm not in a hurry," he answered. "Besides, I see how hard you are trying. It is worthy of respect." Finally, everything was ready. Documents signed, money transferred, keys handed over. Keisha stood in the empty apartment, her apartment, and couldn't believe this was reality. Huge windows, bright rooms, view of the park, all this now belonged to her, only to her. Kurt left part of the furniture as promised, the sofa, dining table, bed. The rest Keisha bought gradually, choosing herself according to her taste. Hanging paintings, arranging books, setting up the balcony. Every little thing brought joy because it was her choice, her decision. She signed up for professional development courses, an intensive course on international financial accounting. Classes took place in the evenings and on weekends. There she met interesting people, just like her, who strove to develop, learn new things, change their lives. During the third class, a man of about 45 sat next to her, tall, with a pleasant smile and attentive eyes. "May I?" he asked, nodding at the free seat nearby. "Of course." "Julian," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Keisha." They started talking after the lecture. It turned out he also worked in an international company, also recently went through a divorce, also trying to start life anew. They exchanged numbers, agreed to prepare for exams together. Meetings became regular, at first only for study, analyzing difficult topics, sharing notes, discussing cases. Then they started going to cafes after classes just to talk, exchange news. Julian was an attentive listener, didn't interrupt, didn't give unsolicited advice, just listened and understood. "You're amazing," he said once when Keisha told him her story. "Not everyone would decide on such a thing, starting everything from scratch at your age." "At my age?" She chuckled. "I'm 42. That's not so old." "Exactly." He smiled. "That's the age when everything is still ahead. You understand that, but many don't. They get stuck in unhappy relationships because they are afraid of change." "I was afraid too," admitted Keisha, "but it turned out living in fear is even worse." Over time, their relationship became warmer, closer. Julian didn't rush things, didn't pressure, just was there. They walked in the park, went to the movies, had dinner in small, cozy restaurants. Keisha learned to trust again, to open up again, to allow herself to be happy again. One evening, as they sat on her balcony with glasses of wine watching the sunset, Julian took her hand. "I'm very glad I met you," he said quietly. "Me too," answered Keisha, and felt tears welling up, happy ones this time. A year had passed since the day she heard that fatal phrase in Kurt's apartment, a year that completely turned her life around. She stood by the window of her condo, looking at the city flooded with evening lights, and thought about what a long path she had traveled. from a quiet, invisible wife who was afraid to utter an extra word to a self-confident woman who manages her own life, from a person who hid her hobbies and dreams to a person who boldly goes toward her goals, from one who depended on someone else's opinion to one who makes decisions herself. The path was difficult. There were moments when she wanted to drop everything, return to the familiar, albeit unhappy, but safe. There were nights when she cried from loneliness and uncertainty. There were days when it seemed nothing would work out, that she was too weak, too inexperienced, too ordinary to cope. But she coped because she found strength in herself she didn't suspect, because she believed in herself when no one else believed, because she decided to take a step into the unknown, despite the fear. And now, standing in her apartment, in her home, she understood. What seemed like the end turned out to be a beginning. The beginning of a new, real life, a life where she chooses her own path. The phone rang on the table. Keisha picked up, saw Julian's name on the screen. "Hi," she said, smiling. "Yes, I'm home. Of course, come over. I'll be waiting." She hung up and looked out the window again. Ahead was a whole life, her life, and she was ready to live it the way she wanted herself. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.